Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Dynamics GP Tips and Tricks Year-End Close. I'm Megan Turco, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'm going to briefly go over how to use the webinar console. The orange arrow on the right side of your screen will let you toggle the control tray open or closed, and at the bottom of that control tray you'll see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar via the chat function. On your GoToWebinar console, you should also see an area for audio settings. If you're calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. And alternatively, if you're using your computer speakers, please select the Use Mic and Speakers option instead. I do want to note that today's webinar is being recorded. We will send out the slides as well as a link to the on-demand recording of the webinar within about 48 hours. So definitely keep an eye out for that message if you're interested in accessing the webinar after today or sharing with any of your colleagues who couldn't make it to the webinar live today. And with that, I would like to introduce today's presenters. First up, we have Erin Chan-Santos, who is a manager on Armanino's Dynamics GP practice. Erin has over 10 years of experience in implementing Microsoft Dynamics GP. She's a GP certified master and specializes in training and implementing core financials, distribution, multi-currency, and consolidations, report writer, and management reporter. We also have Seher Ahmed with us today, who is a senior consultant on Armanino's GP team. Seher has extensive experience with implementations, upgrades, data migration training, and product support for Dynamics GP. Her areas of knowledge include GP core financials, distribution, fixed assets, multi-currency, FRX management reporter, SQL, and various third-party products that work with Dynamics GP. She is also a GP certified specialist in financials, inventory, and order processing. And with that, it's great to have you both with us here today. I'm going to pass the presentation over to Erin to get us started.
Welcome everybody to the year-end close planning. We will be going over how to install the year-end update in addition to reviewing each of the modules that you see in the list here in the modules listed below. We do recommend that you close the modules in this order, which is slightly different than Microsoft. We typically go down this order because it follows your regular month-end close process where you will get through your receivables, your payables, do the inventory counting and closing of the inventory module, then move to your fixed assets, make sure you run your fixed assets depreciation, close the general ledger for the year, and then also do payroll. So these are the topics that we will be covering today. On this next slide, you'll see a planning checklist. We've offered this in the past, and in addition to this time, just to get you thinking through your process for your year-end close. A lot of times you want to make sure you designate people to do it, and also due dates are important to make sure that we put those on the calendar and get them done in an appropriate time frame. These are the support dates that GP has put out, Microsoft has put out for the GP versions. You can see that the life cycle changes by depending on the version that you have. So make sure that you plan accordingly for future years. Also know that there is no longer an update for anybody who has GP 2010 or prior versions. So if you have any questions about those year-end close process or having to update your 1099 forms, that's when you want to call our support desk for additional help. Also note that if you have a hosted GP solution at Rose ASP, they will be rolling out the year-end on your applications at a scheduled time. So keep a lookout for that information. These are the current targeted release dates also. So mid to late November. These are hyperlinks. Oh, here. Oh, I'm sorry. These actually have hyperlinks or live links. So when you'll be getting the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on these and they will actually link to the location where you can download it. If you have any additional questions beyond what we have provided here today, again, there's our help desk email right there, and you can contact them and they will help you review the year-end close process or direct you to the right locations. If you have need to actually have Armanino help you walk through the year-end close process, we do recommend that you contact us now rather than later to just make sure that we schedule that at an appropriate time and that we prepare you for the actual year-end close process. The following listed here are changes to the GP as well as a result of the year-end close download that you will be clicking on for your version. So we do not have any changes to W-2s or 3s. We do have our electronic filing for W-2s. There's payroll year-end has its own update. We do have minor changes to the 1099 and 1096 form. Also, if you're using the Affordable Care Act for reporting in GP, make sure that you install the year-end update because there are changes to that as well. And they will not be electronically filed through GP, so you also want to plan for that in advance as well if that's what you are planning to do. There will be additional changes that may come out as Microsoft is now just publishing the beginning of their final edits and documentation on the year-end close process. So clicking on those links and some of the ones also within this slide deck will help you be abreast of what is coming out in the next few weeks. Here are the links to the individual module closes. Again, they're listed in the order that we propose that you close your modules within GP. Each one of these will tell you how to prepare, what to print out, what you'll be looking for, and the actual close process for each of the modules. So it's in more detail than what we'll be going through today. And then note at the bottom there's a blog series that Microsoft puts out and regularly updates to also give you additional information. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sahara, and she's going to talk about a couple of the modules, and then I'll come back a little later.
Hi everyone. So going through the receivables process with you guys, I just want to remind you that it is date sensitive, meaning that if you have any transactions that are going to be posted in 2017, I would go ahead and skip the year-end close process. You want to go ahead and make sure all transactions are posted for 2016. You want to do the year-end close before going ahead and posting anything to the following year. So again, if you already post anything to the new year, I would go ahead and skip the receivables close. And the same thought process would also apply to payables and inventory. Those are the three that are optional. Another thing I would recommend is before you get started, have a GP year-end close folder somewhere in a shared location so you could save all your reports to that location. I would also recommend that you switch your default printer in GP to PDF so that when you are printing through those reports, it will go directly to those folders and you're not printing to a printer, because receivables, for example, has tons of pages that will print out at the very end. Going on into the process for the receivables close, you want to make sure that you have all sales and receivables transactions posted for the year. You do want to check financials batches for batches that have failed, and these are usually system-generated batches, so they will be replaced with maybe the RM or SOP batch. It won't have the original batch ID listed, so do check those and make sure that those are posted as well. You also want to make sure that you process commissions. Another thing that you want to do is run a receivables and sales reconcile. Now, I do want to make sure that you guys are cautious when doing that, because if you do reconcile amounts in the system, the whole point of it is that if there's, for example, maybe a power fluctuation that occurred, it makes sure that your data is accurate. You might also use this function if you discover any inconsistencies in your reporting. Now, this is something I think should definitely be ran for people that don't do their normal month-end process to make sure that their receivables, historical age trial balance is matching their GL trial balance. For people that don't have that issue, everything's fully matching, you can go ahead and actually skip this part. For people that aren't doing the month-end process, make sure you run it just in case to make sure your numbers are accurate. Before doing the year-end close process, make sure that you have a SQL database backup before the process, and then also make sure that you have one after you're done. I would recommend saving those backups to a different location than your normal location so that they don't get deleted. When closing the year, you're going to be closing both the calendar year and the fiscal year. It's going to be done at the same time, and we'll go over what that means exactly in the next slides. So what does the year-end close process in receivables do? For the calendar year-end close, it clears the calendar year-to-date finance charges and moves them to the last year calendar field in the summary page. The same thing happens in the fiscal year-end close. It transfers all amounts other than the calendar year-to-date finance charge amount, and it moves it over to the last year column. So truly receivables, the only thing it's doing is it's updating these windows that are listed here. If this isn't something that you guys use for your reporting, that's why we say it's an optional close as well. And you'll see in the next window which window it is exactly. So this is your fiscal year view. Under summary, you have a couple of options. You have fiscal years, amount since last close, and calendar years. And you'll see that everything in your year-to-date will transfer over to the next column. So these are the only things that update. What I do, again, want to remind you guys that if you have any transactions from 2017 and you do the year-end close, it'll also be included in these windows. That's why we say it's date sensitive. If you absolutely have to enter transactions for 2017, I would probably recommend that you enter those transactions into a batch, but don't post that batch until you complete your 2016 close. Now going into the customer settings, this is an example of the customer card. You want to make sure you have your maintain history boxes checked. Instead of having to check each customer, the best thing you should do is to go ahead and update this on the customer class and then roll it down to each customer instead. That will be the quickest way to complete that. Now, taking a look at the receivables year-end close window, this shows you the last closing date. If you do choose to print the year-end closing report, again, I recommend that you print to PDF because the amount of paper it's going to consume is, I think it's about 6 customers per page. So if you have tons of customers, then you're looking at tons of pages. So go ahead and print that to PDF. Now the report is an informational report and it's not a posting journal. It will show you what information will move from this year to last year in that summary columns that I showed you previously. Now going into payables, again, you want to make sure your order stays the same. Payables is another one that is date sensitive. If transactions are posted for the following year, go ahead and just skip the year-end close process. Or if you want to go ahead and enter your transactions for the following year, save them to the batch, but don't post them until you complete this process. So again, receivables, payables, and inventory are optional. So now part of the payables year-end close process, you do want to ensure that you have tax ID numbers for 1099 vendors. So I recommend using a smart list to gather that information and to make sure that you have those tax ID numbers. You want to make sure that you post all transactions for the years. You want to make sure that financial batches doesn't have any failed system-generated payables batches or purchasing batches. You do want to make sure you run the reconcile utility in purchasing and payables if needed, meaning that if you go ahead and complete your normal month-end process where you compare your payables, historical age trial balance to your GL trial balance, if everything ties, you're totally fine. If you do not do a month-end process, I would recommend going ahead and do committing to that tool, because what it's going to do is it's going to verify the unapplied payments, the unpaid finance charges and current balances totals, and it'll reflect the transaction amounts posted for them. You can also select to reconcile summary amounts, fiscal year amounts, and calendar year amounts. So it'll, again, just double check that your data is accurate. If payables management is integrated with purchase order processing, you want to make sure you reconcile purchase order processing before you reconcile payables management. You should verify purchase order information first because it might change based on after you running that payables process. Now going back to our slide, you want to make sure that you print the historical age trial balance for 2016 and go ahead and save that to that folder that I suggested earlier. You do want to make sure that you have a pre and post SQL database backup. As far as closing the purchasing series, you want to run the fiscal year end as close to the actual fiscal year as possible because it's going to move the amount since last close from year to date to last year. You want to run the calendar year end as close to if your fiscal year is starting on January 1st, 2017 as possible. You must complete this task prior to entering again any transactions in the following new year in order to have accurate vendor summary information. Now going into some of the tips, again, payables is not fully date sensitive, so it's still recommended that you process your year-end closing routine at the actual year-end. Make sure that your vendor is marked 1099 at the time transactions are posted or paid for 1099 information to auto-populate. There's a couple of windows where you can make sure your 1099 amounts are accurate or you can update them. One is the 1099 details window, which is listed under cards. You can edit the 1099 amounts individually or by period. You can also use the update 1099 information utility, and what that is if you have a 1099 vendor that was set up in which you forgot to set it up as a 1099, the tool will go ahead and update the vendor as a 1099 and update each individual 1099 transaction. So it's kind of like a mass utility. So this is what the edit 1099 amounts windows look like. If the amounts are wrong, you're going to edit the values here. Now, if you have a whole year worth of data to update, I would recommend putting it in the December period for the vendor. Now, this is the first year in which the 1099 form, if Box 7 has earnings to the IRS, has been moved to January 31st. Employers will need to submit them to the SSA and to recipients by January 31st. If you have more than 250 1099s that you need to file electronically, you can actually contact Alex, who's part of our sales team, and she can assist you. Another thing is the year-end update does not so the year-end update does contain the changes to the 1099 form. So if you're on GP 2016, 2015, 2013, you're okay. But if you're on GP 2010 or any versions prior to that, please contact us so that we can update your 1099 form for you. I would also recommend that you order your forms beforehand so that we can also assist you with alignment to make sure that everything lines up for when you are ready to print your 1099s. So taking a look at the vendor settings, you do want to make sure your maintain history is selected. Instead of checking each vendor, you can actually go ahead and make sure these items are marked on the vendor class and then roll them down to the vendors. Another thing that you can also double check are the tax type and the 1099 box. You can make these changes on the class and then roll them down to the vendors. So this is the 1099 setup window. This is where all the minimums are maintained. I would recommend that you check them prior to printing the 1099s. This is in the payable setup window. Entering the company tax ID. If you don't have the tax ID set up on the company setup card, what will happen is each time you go into the 1099 print window, you will have to manually enter the tax registration number. So go ahead and make sure you have this set up in your company setup window, and it'll make things a lot easier when you get to your 1099 printing. So in order to print the 1099s, there's two printer icons in GP 2016. It varies in the earlier versions. The print button on the right-hand side will give you a report showing all relevant 1099 data for the vendors. This is your 1099 edit list. The edit list is a good way to view data for all vendors for which a 1099 will be printed. The report can also be used to confirm tax ID numbers, names, addresses, and 1099 amounts. I suggest also printing an alignment form prior to printing the 1099s. When you're ready to print your 1099s, the print form action button will print the form indicated in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. So there's the option for the 1099 alignment form and 1096. So yeah, go ahead and select the 1099 form, and then the printer icon on the left-hand side is the one that you'll choose to print your 1099s. For the payables year-end close, if your fiscal year is not on the calendar year end, what I would recommend is running the routine for the calendar year end first, and then going ahead and running it for the fiscal year end. So running them separately rather than together. The fiscal year-end close will move all except 1099 amount paid from year to date to last year. The calendar year-end close moves the 1099 amount paid from year to date to last year. So moving on into inventory. Again, inventory is one of those that is date sensitive, so it's an optional close. If transactions are posted for the following new year for any of these modules, I would recommend skipping the year-end close process for them. For the inventory year-end close process, you want to make sure that all invoice transactions, sales order processing transactions, and inventory transactions for the current year have been entered and posted. You do want to check your financials batches for failed system-generated batch. Again, they're not going to have your GP batch ID. It will have a system-generated batch ID. I would recommend running the inventory reconcile utility only if you do not complete a month-end close and actually compare your reports to make sure that they're tied up. Now, the thing about the reconcile process and inventory, I would highly recommend that you look at Microsoft's detailed slide on the year-end close process, because it'll go over the order of running the reconcile. So when it comes to the inventory module, you want to close that before you post any sales and purchasing transactions in the new year, because if you don't do this, the items history numbers will not be accurate. Also, the inventory turnover report may not be accurate because the items beginning quantities for the year will not be accurate. If you want to enter future period transactions before closing the years, you do want to create a new batch that has the new transactions. However, don't post them until after the year end has been closed. So again, as mentioned, the year end closing for this module is option. There is no harm in not closing inventory as well as receivables and payables. The real benefit, though, is in the inquiry windows and the smart list reports for the period and yearly summaries. That's what it is going to truly update. I do want to stress for you guys to be very cautious when running that inventory reconcile. The full process, again, is documented in Microsoft's detailed procedures listed in the previous slides. The order is to first run the sales reconcile, the purchasing reconcile, and then the inventory reconcile. Depending on the number of transactions, it's best to run the tool after hours or on a weekend. So what does the year-end close process do in GP? It transfers all summarized current year quantity, cost, and sales amounts to last year for the items for which you have been keeping summarized sales history. It updates the amounts in the items beginning quantity field to the quantity on hand field at each site. Certain reports, such as the turnover report, use the amounts in the beginning quantity field for report calculations. It zeroes out the quantity sold field in the item quantities maintenance window for each site. It also removes purchase receipts and cost change history for each item that have been completely sold. It removes any discontinued items from the item records that have been completely sold. It also removes any lot attributes from the records of lot numbered items if they have been completely sold. A couple of other options when you're doing the process is you can also update the standard cost of each item to the current cost if you use either the FIFO periodic method or the LIFO periodic valuation method. So yeah, that's what it does. Now, some of those things that I did mention, though, those are optional. You can select those. If you don't select them, it won't remove anything, and we'll go through that in our next slides. Now the item maintenance settings, again, you want to make sure that your maintain history is selected. It's best to go ahead and make this change on your inventory item class and to roll it down to all items. So we'll go over a couple of options on the year-end close. So you have the option to select the discontinued items checkbox, the sold receipts checkbox, or the sold lot attributes checkbox. If you select these checkboxes, all items, sold receipts, and sold lot attributes that have a zero balance will be removed during the year-end close process. The sold receipts process is typically run to reduce the length of the purchase receipts layers in your purchase receipts reports. And I'll show you what that looks like in the following slides. If you go ahead and select to remove the discontinued items, all discontinued items that have a zero balance will be removed during the year-end close. Items can be designated as discontinued by using the item maintenance window as well. If you want discontinued items to no longer appear in the item master, so you can only remove them during the year-end close process, and only if those items have zero quantity on hand and no open POs are out there or sales orders with that item included. It's important to note that if you still want to run sales reports that include these items, then you do not want to select that box to remove the discontinued items. And if you remove the sold receipts, the layers of the $0 amounts remaining can be removed during the year-end close process, so anything that has that zero under value remaining will no longer show on the reports. If you go ahead and select the update item standard cost in the year-end close window, if you're using a standard cost method, when you mark this box, the current cost of the item will replace the standard cost. The current cost is the amount that you most recently paid for the item. And the last thing that, again, is a reminder is that there's no report at the end of inventory. So if you do make any of these selections, just make note of what you did exactly, because inventory doesn't have a year-end close report. The quantity sold is reset after the close. This is especially important for people running any analytics on their quantity sold. If you don't run it, it will always report the amount sold since the last time you closed inventory. Also, the returned quantity will also be updated when you do the year-end close process in inventory. So moving on to fixed assets. Fixed assets is not an optional close. You want to make sure that you do your fixed assets process before completing your GL close. So we'll go over what that looks like. We recommend that you print the following reports prior to the fixed assets year-end close. Again, go ahead and print them to PDF and save them to that year-end close folder. You want to make sure you have your annual activity, additions, retirements, transfers, depreciation ledger, property ledger, and then your fixed asset to GL reconciliation. You do want to make sure that you complete your month-end processes, including posting depreciation through the last day of your fiscal year. So if your last day is December 31st, you want to make sure you run depreciation all the way through December 31st. You do want to make sure that you complete a pre- and post-year-end SQL database backup. So what does the year-end process do in GP? In the Asset General Information window, the year-to-date maintenance amount is cleared from the Expand Last Maintenance Date window. And again, this will make sense when we look at one of the examples in the following slides. The quantity is copied to the Begin Quantity field in the Expand Quantity window. In the Asset Book window, the year-to-date depreciation amount is cleared. The cost basis is copied to Begin Year Cost field. The life-to-date depreciation is copied to Begin Reserve field, and the salvage value is copied to Begin Salvage field. When it comes to completing the year-end close for fixed assets, you want to make sure that you close all the fixed assets books at the appropriate time. Versions 2013 and prior do not have a fixed assets year-end close report. In the versions prior, you would just see that the books move from the selected books back to the available books column. That's how you would know that the process is completed. So what exactly gets reset? The begin year cost is reset to the cost basis, and the year-to-date depreciation is reset to 0. Now, in my example, I don't have that set to 0, but you will see that clear and move to 0. That's the easiest way to check if you properly did complete the year-end close process in fixed assets. Another way to check if everything looks good is to go into your book setup. Because what it will do is it will reset your book to the current or fiscal year. If you check this window, if it doesn't show your current fiscal year as the 2017 year, something went wrong, and we can definitely help you work through that. But this is an easy way to checking that everything looked okay. Now, we're going to move into the GL close process, and I'm going to turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you, Sahar. I'm going to talk about the year-end close process for the general ledger. This is a recommended year-end close process for everybody that's on GP. We do not advocate that it is optional for most people. What is the general ledger process that you will be going through? You will create, you will do all the regular month-end close processes that you have done in the past for all other months, doing your accruals and so on. Also, all your reconciliations. You will make sure you print your financial statements. And that's basically where it ends as far as the month-end close process. You also want to make sure that you create a new fiscal year. You want to check a couple of different setups like you do with all the other modules prior to actually closing the year in the general ledger. You also want to make sure that you have enough disk space on the SQL server that you're actually going to prior to your close, because what it does is it actually keeps double or 2 times the size of your GL open file open during the close process, and you want to make sure that you have enough space for that process to take place. You also want to make sure that you have a backup prior to your year-end close process, and then you will run your year-end close process, and we will get a report at the end to show what was close to your retained earnings. So what does the year-end close process do in the general ledger? Well, specifically, it takes your balance sheet accounts and it brings them forward in a balance brought forward journal entry. And then all the records are moved from the open tables to the historical tables. You will also have inactive GL accounts you can change without balances, and historical transactions can optionally be removed. The year-end that was just closed is marked as historical, although you can still journal into the most recent historical year. And if installed and activated, your Analytical Accounting module is also automatically closed with the GL close process. Here are some of the setups that you want to make sure that you double check before you do the year-end close process. You want to make sure that you're maintaining history of both the accounts, transactions, and budgets. If you are allowing posting to the historical year, you may check this box. You can uncheck it and check it at any time. It will only pertain to the most recent closed year in GP. You also want to make sure that your GL account for the retained earnings is set up correctly. Now, if you have divisional account retained earnings accounts, make sure that those are set up correctly as well. Another area that you want to double check is you want to enable posting numbers. Posting numbers are different than journal numbers within GP, and I will explain that on further slides, but just know that the posting number will also change per your toggle switch down there. So by the year is generally what most people select. So posting numbers in GP are actually a different field, as you can see, than your journal entry number field. When added, it's like an additional piece of information for your journal entries, and they are actually assigned in order of which you're actually posting them. So journal entry numbers, they can change depending on when your entering your transactions. Posting numbers are actually assigned when you're posting the transactions. Posting numbers also do not duplicate. They just continue to move forward like an index within GP. Posting types is another thing that you want to double check. Like I said, balances are brought forward if they are a balance sheet type versus a P&L or profit and loss type, which are the two posting type transactions that you can have in GP. The P&L accounts are actually close to retained earnings in the year-end close process, whereas the balance sheet account balances are moved forward to the new year. So it does make a difference if you want your retained earnings to calculate correctly. The way we normally recommend that you check on this is that you create a smart list, much like you see here, calling one balance sheet accounts to check. So any outliers would fall in this area if we need to change them. Likewise for the balance sheet accounts. There's a similar one. Unit accounts traditionally behave like balance sheet accounts where the balance of the account is brought forward to the next year. However, if you would like to have them clear for the beginning of the new year, you want to make sure under the unit account maintenance screen that you check the box that says clear the balance during the year-end close process. This will actually zero them out at the year-end close and then be ready to calculate for the next year. If you do have analytical accounting, remember that the analytical accounting is actually included, the close process is included in the general ledger close process. We do recommend, while there is not a separate process for analytical accounting close, that you go through the normal procedures of making sure that your reporting is correct, making sure your data is valid, and and that is all accurate prior to closing. So again, as long as your financial statements report what you need them to, then that's fine. Here's a link below to any additional questions that you have about analytical accounting. Again, if you have additional questions beyond what's here or in that article, you can feel free to contact our help desk. If you've never done a year-end close, we also recommend at this point that potentially you would like to do a year-end close process in a test environment so that you actually know and can predict the timing it takes and what to expect during that process. This is actually the general ledger closing window. You can see here, again, it states your retained earnings account. It'll tell you your starting journal entry number. You have those options if you want to remove unused segments or if you want to maintain inactive accounts. And you can see below there are a couple of other options there. Notice on this window that we have a nice progress bar, which we never had until like I think 2013. Also the option to reverse a historical year. So in GP, generally speaking, the most current historical year is the one that you can update and post entries to. If you find that your retained earnings account did not calculate correctly, you can reverse historical years and it'll actually change that journal entry that was made and it'll reopen the year for you to make an adjustment to the setups or an additional changes that you want to make in the other modules. Now we'll move on to the payroll year-end close. So these are the steps that you will do during the payroll year-end close. We want to make sure that you have the right payroll tax update for the year-end close file that you will be creating. You want to do all the normal month-end processes, just like we typically say with every module. We want to make sure that you make backups right after you create, before and after you create the year-end file, just to make sure you have them if you need to roll back. There is no reverse in this module. You also have information for your W-2s. You can make an adjustments. And then the last step you want to do before you do any payroll activity for 2017 is to go ahead and install the payroll tax update. This is the window that you'll check to make sure that you have the update that you need for your year-end close file. Again, if it does not say the appropriate year, please feel free to download the one that is needed for this year. It'll be, you want it to say 2016 before you actually create that year-end file. To create the year-end file, you simply just go to the payroll routine section, and then you will select the year-end closing. Here you want to make sure that it is selected for actually 2016, and then you will click on the create button. The year-end wage report file can actually be recreated through the year-end closing window. You can actually delete them if it was wrong and then recreate them. Just make sure that you have backups prior to doing these processes so that you can go back and then do the close again. If you happen to close the years by mistake, you can reopen the year by going to this window and you remove the year-end information. So again, this is a process that you can do a few times, but make sure that you have the appropriate steps so that you have a way of going back. Then you will view the W-2 information. You can click on this print information here, and this will actually give you like the edit list for you to review. If you do need to make changes, you can actually go to the windows listed here and make additional changes to this window. And this is the information that will actually print on that W-2. So again, the report prior to this is where you go to actually change it. Changes made to the employee card after the year-end file was created will not roll down and update this window. If employee master file information was changed, either recreate the year-end file or update the information in both places. Next, you can print out the W-2 forms. You can print the W-2 statements as many times as you want to. Printing the 1099-R form allows the process. Wait, that's just the W-2s. So just make sure that you run and validate the reports as well. Because you've already created the close, year-end close, you can also make sure that you close the payroll module for that historical year or for the new year, just to make sure that nobody's making any adjustments. And this is just the normal fiscal year-end close window. And then prior to making any changes or any updates to payroll for 2017, you want to make sure that you install the payroll tax update. So you will go to the window in the next slide, and it will walk you through a little wizard to go ahead and update your tax information for 2017. To create your W-2 file for electronic filing, you will go to this window and just make sure you put the information in and then click on the Submitter window button in the lower right-hand corner. And that will conclude the payroll year-end close module.
Thanks, Erin and Sahar. So it looks like we do have a few questions today, but if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to submit them now in the chat window on your webinar console. So our first question, and actually Sahar, this came up as you were discussing the payables year-end close process. What is a pre and post SQL database backup?
So this is something, if you are hosted by Rose ASP, they will be the ones that will do your backup for you. If your IT is maintaining your SQL database, now this is everything in the back end. Your IT will be doing that, that backup. If you're not sure, contact us and we have access to some of you guys, your environments, and we can actually complete that task for you. It's basically doing a company backup from the back end. In case anything goes wrong, we can restore it from a backup.
And can 1099s be printed after the year-end close?
Yes, they can be printed after the year-end close.
And let's see here. Sorry, we're getting a couple of them in right now. What will be missing on vendor 1099s if we don't do the year-end update?
There is a link on there. There's a Microsoft link. If you click on it, that does have the details of what has been updated to those, what updates have been made to those boxes. I do not know off the top of my head right now, but I can send you the information.
And do we have to wait for audit adjustments to be posted before completing the year-end close process?
No, you can go ahead and complete your audit adjustments, and then you can do your year-end close. You don't have to wait at all.
This one's a little bit longer, so bear with me on this one. So if we need to open a historical year other than the one that's most recent, are there any other steps to consider other than reversing prior year, booking post-close adjustments, and then reperforming the year-end close process?
So to be honest, I would not actually give a recommendation without looking at your environment and what you're trying to complete exactly. You are on the right path though as far as reopening, but you do need to understand what can happen if you do that process. So please reach out to us and we can actually assist you and just confirm whatever you're doing if it is correct.
And I think we've got one more here. Where do you check for filed batches?
For failed batches?
Oh, maybe that was a bit of a typo. Maybe it's failed batches.
Okay, under transactions, financial batches, that's where you would double check and make sure that there aren't any batches that are system generated. And again, they're not going to have your normal batch ID numbers. It'll be a system generated. I think the first 2 to 3 letters will show you which module they came from. PM and POP are examples of something that came from payables. And purchasing. I think there's also RM. You'll know that that's coming from receivables. So do check that. And I would recommend that you check that at month end just to make sure that things have gone through to the GL.
Thanks, Seher. And a number of you did ask about receiving the slides and or the recording of today's webinar. So today's webinar was recorded. We'll be sending out a link to the on-demand recording and also to a PDF of the slides that can be accessed on our website probably in about 2 days. So you'll probably just check out for that email from us, and you'll be able to share that with anyone who couldn't join with us today, and then of course review all of the notes and the hyperlinks and everything that Erin and Seher shared today. So that actually does wrap up the questions that we had. If anyone does have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to our help desk or to Erin and Seher directly. Their contact information is up, but like I mentioned, we'll be sending you guys the slides. So I'm sure many of you already have their contact info, but for those of you who don't, feel free to grab it from the slides when you receive those. As we exit the webinar today, there is a quick survey, so definitely take a moment to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar and share any comments you have for future webinars so we can continue bringing you some great content. And with that, thank you, Erin and Seher, very much, and everyone enjoy the rest of your afternoon.